Alright, so this is part 2 for chapter 5 on the discussion about tariffs and quotas. First I want to go over the terms to make sure those are in your memory there, so you remember them. And then I want to take apart the different symbols that are used in the chart. So that way you'll understand what they're referring to. And then, of course, finally, I want to explain the two charts that you just viewed. Okay, so first let's do some definitions. So your textbook discusses this topic on page 157 of your textbook. And the definition that they give of a quota is something that restricts the total number of certain products that can be imported into a country. It indirectly raises the prices of those imports by reducing their supply. So basically what a quota amounts to is that it is a government edict, basically, that says to foreigners, you're only allowed to import a certain quantity of a particular good, and we're not going to let you just ship in anymore. So an example would be, let's say Canada says to Japan, you're only allowed to ship over 30,000 cars, and that's it. No more cars. It doesn't matter what the market says, it doesn't matter what the market demand would allow for. We don't care. We're the government. We say 30,000 is all you're going to get. And that's basically the idea. A similar trade restriction called the voluntary export restriction, or restraint, I think is what they call it. So, yeah, restriction. Voluntary export restriction is basically the same idea as a quota, where a country, as opposed to being told, like in the quota set, the Canada tells Japan, you're not going to do this. There are occasions where a country like Japan would voluntarily agree to restrict its exports. And it's basically the same idea as a quota. It's all that this term means is restriction on quantity. Okay? Now the other one that your book mentions is the tariff. And a tariff is a tax. Okay? And it's a tax that's charged on imported products. Okay? And basically, tariffs, according to your textbook, raise the price of imports to consumers, who must pay not only for the products, right, but also for the tariff. And then it mentions the revenue tariff and the trade protection tariff, the protective tariff, or protectionist tariff, whatever, same thing. Okay, so let's just sort of, before I get into discussing the bits of the chart, quota just means restriction on the quantity that can be imported in a country. Right, it's like saying you're only allowed to import 5 tons of steel, and that's it, over, let's say, a course of a year. A tariff is like a tax. It's like saying, what it basically is saying is, like, let's say you're normally selling a car for $10,000, and they tack on, let's say, 20% tariff, so now the price in the domestic market goes up to $12,000. Now the trick to the tariff, of course, is that it only applies to the importer, right? So in that situation where the initial price was $10,000, the tariff of $2,000, the importer is only going to get the price of $10,000. They're not going to get $12,000. However, domestic producers will get the new higher domestic price, and I'll be showing that basic finding in the charts. Okay, so the tariff is one-sided. It's a right. It basically favors, is biased in favor of the domestic producer. Okay. Now the chart has two sides, and you'll notice the left-hand side is much less intimidating than the right-hand side. That's maybe one of the reasons why the free trade position is usually liked in economics, because it's easier to understand, for goodness sakes. The right-hand side is the protectionist side, a little more complicated. Not too much more complicated, a bit more complicated to try to explain. Okay, so now both of these charts, what's basically happening is it starts with the chart on the left-hand side, the one that's labeled free trade. And the right-hand chart, the one on the right hand, is basically, looking at the same products, the same world price, and asking what would happen if, let's say, the government started from free trade and now decided to adopt a protectionist policy. Okay? The horizontal axis, that's the one going this way, okay, is the quantity. Okay, so this is a measuring the number of units. Okay, so for simplicity, what I'm going to refer to this as, I'm going to pick some sort of product. Let's just use cars. Okay, so this is the number of cars. That's all it means. Okay, and that's true in both scenarios. The vertical axis, the one going this way, is the price axis. Okay, so this is the price. This is the price. It's like you go buy a car. That's the sticker that has, pay this price. Now the green curve that is downward sloped, that has a D on it, is the demand curve. Now, and in particular, this is a domestic demand curve. Okay, so let's treat Canada as the domestic country, okay, the home country, if you will, and we'll, for simplicity, call Japan the foreign country that wants to export cars from Japan to Canada, just for illustrative purposes. So the downward sloping curve is the domestic demand curve. So this is basically, we're looking at the Canadians, and it's saying, how many cars do Canadians want to consume if they saw these different prices? The reason it's downward sloping is very simple. If the price of cars is very high, then the quantity of cars demanded would be very low, right? Because they're very expensive and very few people can afford them. And then following that along, when the price of cars goes very low, then lots of people can afford them, so the demand goes up. And that's why the curve has that kind of downward sloping shape. So when you see this demand curve, this domestic demand curve, this is basically looking at things from the point of view of the domestic, the Canadian consumers, and how much, or how many, I should say, how many cars they wish to purchase at these different prices. And in the next clipping, I'll continue on with it, finishing up explaining what all these different letters on this chart mean, and then explaining sort of how tariffs and quotas work.